for being here. Again, thank you all for being here, and thank you for many of you who are returnees. Just curious how many of you are returning, how many of you are coming for the first time. So you could just write the word return or first in the chat. Let me know if we have had opportunity to work together or not. Grace, welcome. Constance, welcome. And everybody else, welcome back. For those of you, some first timers, Meg, welcome. Sarah and Judith and many others. Patricia is actually a returnee. So for all of you who are new, welcome. I hope that you will get some value out of this, as well as all the returnees clearly have gotten something, and I'm hopeful to add more as we move forward. This is actually one of my favorite topics, something I talk about a lot, maybe perhaps more than almost anything else that I discuss, is the topic of delegation. And so let's jump right into it. In fact, I think today I may have to go beyond an hour. It's possible. If you cannot stay, that's totally fine. Stay as long as you possibly can. But I do want to alert you that at the end of this presentation today, I do have some resources that I'm going to be sharing with you. You may have seen this slide before. I don't think it could ever be redundant or unnecessary, but I do think that the main thing is we have to remember that in addition to learning, we are also trying to create community here, which is very important to me, and I think to many others as well. So remember, you're not alone. We're all together in this situation. We're all together in this community of learning, and my hope is to continue to build upon it. Obviously, stay safe and think about kindness and strength for yourself, strength for others that you can be sharing. Let everybody know that you are learning. Let everybody know what you're doing in order to grow, because that will inspire others as well. And of course, if in fact you do share it on social media, please tag me to make sure that I can reinforce and spread the message just a little bit further. One last question before we get started. Please share with me your industry, whether that's education or anything. I know we have a bunch of educators on here because I've done quite a few webinars for education so far. But if you're in other fields, please share what that is. We'd like to see if we have a variety here, or it looks so far all education. Not to say that this isn't perfect for educators, but if there are any other industries, we'd love to see that as well. Okay, so I think we're ready to jump in. And for those of you not familiar with me, just a couple of words about what I do. And this is me, I guess you would say somewhere before my haircut, but I am a former teacher and professor and whatnot, and then head of school, and eventually transitioned into executive coaching and consulting. So I work with leaders of all stripes, lots of school leaders as well, in a variety of capacities, whether it's personal coaching, instructional coaching, organizational consulting, everything from mission statements and vision and planning and those kinds of things, a lot of programming and whatnot. So certainly something we could unpack another time. And my focus right now is to really help people be as productive as possible, get the most that they can done, which I think our topic speaks very, very directly to that point, which is how do I delegate tasks to other people? What do I delegate? How do I do so? And how do I do it in a way that adds the most opportunity for them as well as benefit for myself? Now, I do want to share before I go further that this is actually something that I've done a much deeper dive into the topic of delegation. In fact, I called it the Delegate to Accelerate Masterclass. We're not going to be able to get into all of that in this conversation today. So I may raise questions that are not answered, or perhaps you have other questions as well that ultimately do not get answered in this time frame. But we can talk about how to get answers for you in other respects as well. So please do stay with me, because we're going to talk a lot and we're going to share ideas. And again, my hope in all of this is that you feel more empowered, not only in the present, but primarily I would think in the future, as you are getting back into your regular routine. How can you be incorporating delegation more into your daily practice? Now, I am going to be, just so that you know, I have a few other webinars scheduled for this week, and I'm going to be sharing that information later. But I want to mention one of them now, which is the concept of active learning, how to create more of an active learning posture for teachers as well as their students in a remote learning environment, which of course is what we're dealing with, today and what we're dealing with in general in our school communities. So that'll be happening tomorrow. You may want to share that with your teachers or join me yourself. Certainly would love to have everybody here. Come back tomorrow. But I'm going to try to practice what I preach at least a little bit, not as savvy or sophisticated probably as many of you because you're doing it every day. But I'm going to minimally try to encourage active participation, not just through the chat, but through question and conversation, quote unquote, as well. But we'll get there shortly. And in the meantime, I wanted to share with you today's primary objectives. So the objectives that I have for this session are threefold. Number one, to identify and respond to common concerns and inhibitors relating to delegating, which basically means we know we need to delegate more, but we don't. And we have to figure out why we don't, what's holding us back, and how we can get past those inhibitors. Because if we don't, the rest of this conversation is purely academic and will really make limited benefit for you. So the critical thing is, I know that I'm not doing it or not doing it enough. I know that I can be doing it more or better. What's getting in my way? That would be step number one. Number two, to share the benefits of delegating, right? Again, making the case. Now, I don't like to do much on the theory side. I like to really focus on the practice, but we do have to remember that it is our mindsets in many cases that get in the way, that prevent us from doing our best work. By the way, I will mention as I'm looking at the chat, a number of you are still chatting directly to me because you have set as a default in your chat function all panelists. But I would encourage you to click to where it says all panelists and attendees. This way, when you respond, everybody can see it. And then the final one, which is the biggest one, is to review 13 steps of effective delegation. Some of them we will spend more time on, some of them a little bit less. But the idea is that we want to know the actual steps that will help us be better delegators. So here is a question for you. I have a little bit of fun with this. I like to usually look around the room and get my responses. Obviously can't do that today. Each of these four are captions of things that end with the word gate. Feel free to tell me what you see. For the purpose of numbering, the top left is number 1, bottom left is number 2, top right is number 3, and bottom right is number 4. If you forget the numbers, do not worry about it. By the way, I apologize if I don't pronounce everybody's names correctly, so I don't know if that's Niobe or something different, but either way, thank you for getting us started. That is correct. Number 1 is Watergate. Okay, number 2 is, okay, we didn't get to, okay, Bridgegate is number 2. Meg, I wonder if you are from New Jersey, which is actually where I live. Okay, those of you who live in New Jersey are familiar with former Governor Chris Christie and his alleged order to basically block up Fort Lee and the George Washington Bridge. Yeah, New Jersey. Okay, number 3 is Deflategate. For those who got it right, would anyone like to take a look at what, or to give me a shot at what do you think number 4 is? Colleen, that's a good question. Let's see if we can answer it. Oh, Tracy's on it. Okay. Oh, Deborah, I don't know about that one, maybe, but let's go with delegate. Okay, good, good, delegate, right? So you know that gate, for whatever the reason, has kind of taken on this idea as a suffix of a scandal. And in many cases, I think people would argue that delegation is scandalous because it is something we desperately need, but many of us don't know how, or just too reluctant to do so, or we feel we don't have, I don't want to say too much because that's going to actually be our next slide. Okay, Tracy, I see that you're from California. Welcome everybody from both coasts and everyone in between. And we welcome all professionals, leaders, educators to these webinars. So here is your opportunity to complete a sentence. And let's now unburden ourselves and be honest, right? Complete the sentence, I would delegate more if I. Trusted my team members, knew that people would follow through, weren't an type A control person, could trust others, had time to follow up, could depend on who I'm delegating, didn't have to worry about union rules is what it looks like here. Okay, interesting. Wasn't a perfectionist, could give up control. I appreciate your honesty, everybody. Trusted others. Thank you, Brian. Had common understanding of time sensitivity. Please elaborate, Constance. You agree with all of them. So do I, by the way. I think many people do. And that's why we struggle so much. So keep those coming. Could trust, had relationship, interesting. Could trust that it would be done properly and promptly. My team buy-in, okay, getting others to actually buy in. These are great and all legitimate and all things that we struggle with. Okay, so let's take a look at some common answers that I get. You can keep typing in the chat as you would like. As a reminder, again, I keep seeing a lot of people are just responding to all panelists. So I'm enjoying your responses, but I'm not sure that everybody else is seeing them, at which point they are losing out. So please adjust your chat settings accordingly. All right, so here are four. One of them I don't think I saw at all, maybe a drop. Definitely number one, or the top one, trusted my colleagues more, is a big one. Others talked about control, so that as we sort of circle to the right clockwise, wasn't so controlling. Another one had more time to think about what to delegate. By the way, this actually could be a blessing in disguise as we are stuck at home. I know that everybody's busy with other things, but you may have time to give this more consideration. And the last one, which is a big one, I think, is if I knew how to do it, right? Because nobody wants to start something that they're afraid they're going to have to stop. Nobody wants to start on something that that's going to make them look maybe worse than before, because we've all had experiences with rollouts of new processes, new concepts, changes in job title or description, and then somehow it wasn't thought through properly. The whole thing blows up and we're worse off than where we started. Okay, so these are real. And I think the more that we own the reality behind it, the more we can begin to think about processes by which we're going to change how we operate. Okay, if you have any questions, by all means, please don't hesitate to put that in there. Okay, so now, why should we delegate? Obviously, there are many reasons. Here are just some. The first one, starting on the left side, a project or responsibility to assign. Let's say there's something that needs to be worked on and you need somebody to do it other than yourself. Now, in a different webinar, we talked about the Eisenhower matrix. I'm not going to get into that now in detail, but we all have seen, I think, that grid that talks about urgent and important and different kinds of tasks and responsibilities. The delegation is usually the kind of task which is not urgent and not necessarily, it's not urgent. Let's see here. It's important. It's not urgent. Oh, one second, I'm getting confused. It's quadrant 3. So there's urgent and important that you got to do right away. There's important but not urgent. That's the leadership space where you're kind of thinking about, you know, vision and big picture items and moving the company or the organization forward. And then there's quadrant 3, which is the delegate quadrant. So it's not things that are super important, but usually they're urgent in a way. In other words, they have some time, some immediacy attached to it. So if you've got things you want to get done, for example, you have a proposal to write, or you have some kind of communication that you want to get out, or some other job or responsibility that shouldn't be done by the head of the institution, but rather by somebody else, that's the kind of thing you want to be thinking about with delegation. You want to implement a strategic plan or some other type of long-term project that needs a person to head it. Obviously, there will be leadership input, but not leadership control on a day-to-day. Another consideration is anything that's going to help your people grow. So if you want to feed the leadership pipeline, for example, you have people on your team and you want to help them assume at some point a job or a position similar to your own, or maybe even grooming them to replace you at some point. Simply, you want to help your people grow. You know that that's going to engage them and motivate them, and frankly, they deserve it. So delegating responsibilities that stretch them, take them to a new level, empower them in new ways, that is another great use of delegation. And of course, clearing the organizational bottleneck. So if everything has to go through you in order to get approved and move forward, you're slowing things down, right? And we need to be speeding things up. In today's day and age, people expect quick responses and quick turnaround and things done right. If everything has to go through one central source, that's going to have the opposite effect. So all of these are reasons to delegate. If there's anything that I didn't mention that you would like to include, please go ahead and use the chat to do that. What are some reasons that you would want to be delegating work and responsibility? And of course, I didn't mention the obvious one, which is to help you clear your own plate, because that's very general, and that, we're feeling overwhelmed, we want to delegate. That's totally fine to include that as well. But I try to be in my points over here a little bit more, let's call it strategic, not so much about how it helps you, but how it helps others or the organization that you lead. So again, the question is, why else might you want to consider delegating? Okay, future planning. Tracy, if you could clarify what kind of accountability you're referring to. Get jobs done in the right time frame. So moving things along. Deborah, thank you. Patricia, being overwhelmed. Cora, ownership. When you talk about ownership, clarify what you mean as well, please. I don't know if you're trying to say that you want to expand ownership to others or something different. To grow respect and trust amongst the team, staff engagement. So really helping others grow. I'm seeing a lot of that. Spreading the wealth, moving things forward, helping you clear your plate. Good. Okay, I think we're all on the same page here, that this is important, that we have some blockages and we need to move this forward. So let's talk brass tacks and get things done. First thing I want to talk to you about is what delegation is, as well as what it isn't. Okay, because that's important here. What is it and what isn't it? Take a look for a moment at the definitions, starting on the left side with what it is, and then moving over to the right and what it isn't. And I will follow up with a question in a moment. Okay, so I hope that the definition on the left is pretty much self-explanatory. It's a matter of shifting of authority or responsibility. It's actually not or, it's and. Authority and responsibility. So number one, I'm giving you authority. Number two, I'm providing you or I'm issuing a responsibility for something in particular, function, task, decisions, etc. Let's take a look at what it is inside. And of the six, they're not numbered, but let's number them in our minds. Which one would you say is the biggest revelation, the biggest aha? Like, I didn't really think about that, or I didn't think of it in that particular way. Okay, Ryan, the distribution of tasks, number three. Okay, so a lot of people are talking about three, punting away your weaknesses. We're going to unpack these before we move further. Okay, Rolando, thank you. Telling people what to do. The same in every situation. Therese. Only, so number six, only four. So the numbers are all over the place, which is to be expected. So let's go through all of them. Look, it's interesting. I didn't see anybody put in number one. Maybe I missed it. And if I did, I apologize. Okay, so let's go through them in order. Number one, it isn't dumping or abdicating personal responsibility. So in other words, it's not, you go ahead and do this, I'm walking away. Though interestingly, if you're familiar with Ken Blanchard, who I've already mentioned on different webinars, but he has a book called Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager. It's there that he really unpacks effectively the concept of situational leadership, which I think is a very powerful idea and certainly deserving of its own in-depth conversation. We'll actually talk about it a little bit, but delegation in this model, the one that he's referring to, is where somebody has both a significant motivation as well as a high-level skill set. So not only are they motivated to do it, but they know what to do, and they basically can be left alone by and large. It's still not dumping, but it's trusting. It's, I know you can do this, so I don't need to stand over you and dictate every day and every minute what needs to be done. That's called directing in his model. Different conversation perhaps than what we could have right now. Number two, it's not telling people what to do, but there's more of a buy-in piece, which a number of you have alluded to. Number three, it's not the distribution of tasks where you take this and I'll take this and somebody else takes that. It's a very strategic decision made by the leader or the person of authority to somebody else for specific roles and responsibilities. So it's not as even, if you will, or random, where again, we're just distributing things. It's strategic and there's a particular process in place. It's not the same in every situation because every relationship, not only does the job differ from case to case, but the nature of the relationship and specifically the skill set and motivational level of the direct report is going to change in many cases. So I can't look at two different people in the exact same way if their approach to things is very different, if their skills are different, if their knowledge is different. Number five, about punting away your weaknesses. Right now, it doesn't mean that you can't find somebody. We don't expect a leader to know everything. And so it's not like if I don't understand IT, I have to learn it all because I can't delegate. The point is that it's not, the goal here is not just to punt it all away. You do want to find others who can do things and do them better than you, but minimally you still want to remain involved. And number six is not only for tasks you're unable to do, you want to be thinking about even things you're able to do. And here's the hard one for many of you, I would think, because it's hard for me. Even the ones you like to do are tasks that should be delegated if the situation calls for it. Again, the job of the leader in most cases is to facilitate other people's work and other people's growth, right? Not to own whatever's comfortable or convenient for us. So if we love to write, that doesn't mean that we should be doing the entire school newsletter or the entire corporate email or whatever it is that we might be writing. Yes, you can have input and yes, you can make a contribution, but you should be thinking about how others can contribute as well. Okay, so with that definition, now let's talk about our 13 steps here. I'm going to ask you to look at them without any commentary from me and tell me again, same type of question as what we had before, which one of these would you say that if I didn't say it, you may not necessarily have come up with it on your own? Okay, we got our first response, but keep them coming. A bunch of number ones. Marianne added number 8. Thank you. And number 3. Again, which is the one you would not on your own have assumed would be part of the list? So as you are continuing to respond, I'm going to run through them, and I divided them, you will notice, into 4 categories, and that's how the rest of the PowerPoint will unfold. Sarah, I see that you have a question there, differential between what I wouldn't have assumed and what is a struggle for me to do. Okay, that's a fair point. So number 1, create a delegation culture. Number 2, decide what to delegate, right? You don't just delegate everything, you have to be strategic. Number 3, picking the right person or people or person for that role. Building knowledge and efficacy. Efficacy is about confidence and about the sense that you can get this done. be very clear in terms of task and outcome. That's all in the planning stage. So you'll see there's a lot of planning that goes into delegation, especially bigger projects. Number 6, which is part of empower now. So grant the necessary authority, learn to trust, and be prepared to assist so that you're not just giving it and walking away, but you're stepping in where appropriate. Number 9 and 10 continue along the same line. So now that you've empowered, you want to monitor progress, and then correct or redirect as necessary. So we've planned, we've empowered, we've monitored that. Now that the process is unfolding, how are things actually going? And then finally, numbers 11, 12, and 13 are part of recognition, recognize, and reward. So we want to recognize people for what they're doing during the process as well as at the end, of course, sharing rewards and giving credit to the accomplishments that others deserve, and then reviewing and learning what happened so that you can ensure that the next time is even better than the previous time. Now, to be clear, and Deborah, I appreciate your honesty here. To be clear, I'm not asking at the moment what you would struggle with the most, although that could be your biggest revelation at the same time. But I do want for yourself minimally to think about where you would imagine struggling the most in these 13. Obviously, you don't yet know what all of them mean in the fuller sense of the term, but just seeing what it is, kind of like a bird's eye view of the process, you could be asking yourself, where might my biggest challenge be? But you could also be saying, what am I already good at? But what am I already capable of doing? What's going to be easier for me or already part of my process? So you can kind of check that off. The more that you feel that you're already doing things and doing them well, the better off you're going to be. By the way, I want to keep mentioning this until I see everybody doing it. Kindly adjust your comments to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your feedback, not just I. Okay. So we're going to jump in. Many people, by the way, said number 1 and often say number 1 because who thinks about delegation as a culture? So let's talk about that. But before we do, I did want to mention the 10-80-10 rule that I've heard shared by John C. Maxwell, a well-known leadership expert who's written many, many books, a former minister who understands leadership at its core. And he talks about the 10-80-10 rule in delegation as follows. Almost imagine, I don't know if he discusses this or this is my own interpretation of it, but the 10-80-10 rule as you are flying an airplane. Almost hard to imagine in today's environment, but you're flying an airplane. We know that the hardest job for a pilot typically is takeoff and landing. Once you're in the air, it's relative smooth sailing. You can shift the plane to autopilot and have limited responsibility. You know, an announcement here, an adjustment there, but generally speaking, the pilot doesn't work as hard during that time. But it's during takeoff and landing where the primary complications are, where the real skill development is required to ensure that everybody gets off the ground and back on the ground safe and secure. And I think that when it comes to processes and projects, oftentimes you need to think about it in the same way. The leader's involvement is most critical at the beginning and again at the end. What are we setting out to do? You map it out, you create the goals and all of these kinds of things. During that 80%, assuming that your team is effective or the individual is largely competent, you're more of a hands-off type of role. And then you get involved in the last 10% to bring it to conclusion to ensure that everything ends the way that is intended. And that doesn't mean that you have to own it to that degree. Somebody on the call earlier or the chat talked about being a perfectionist. We all can be that if we're not careful. We all like to do certain things in certain ways, especially if our name is going to be attached to it. So it doesn't mean that last 10% we're going to reclaim it and fix everything up and make it exactly so, because again, that's going to be demotivating. It's also going to help, it's going to limit the learning experience for others. But instead, what we want to do is just make sure that before things roll out, all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, and generally speaking, it was well done. So it's a model to think of, another way to conceive the concept of delegation. Okay, so we are now going to shift into the first segment, which is the planning segment. And with planning, the first thing you want to do is you want to create the culture. So creating a delegation culture is all about giving your team permission. Okay, number one, do you see something that is happening that should be delegated that hasn't been? Okay. And number two, letting people know that if they see a job that they want to take, they should ask for it. Any thoughts on these particular points? Again, giving people permission to remind you. And number two, being able to ask for things if they are interested. Remember that this is about creating growth. It's also about having honest conversation for people. We all get busy. And what happens when you get busy and you know that you have a deadline? So you dive right in and you do the work yourself. But that's not what should be happening. So if you're a school leader, for example, you need to be in classrooms first and foremost. Your primary job is to manage the academic program. That's your greatest opportunity for impact. You shouldn't be stuck in the office doing whatever kind of work you're doing. Let somebody say to you, let me do that, or somebody else should be doing that because you need to be doing this. And of course, it's not only in a school environment where this is true, it's in any leadership situation. The boss and the team leader and the manager, who often might be the same person, have certain things that they're uniquely positioned to be doing, and they should be doing that. And they should allow others to step in and to provide value, and of course, to develop their own skill sets as well. So looking at your comments over here, thank you, Deborah. Constance, you like the first point. That works well for me as an executive director. Okay, that's wonderful. Others as well would love to hear what you have to say. But again, culture is part of it. Culture are the beliefs and the actions and the kind of the way we roll type of things in our institution. So if we as leaders give permission and create expectations that delegation is how we do things, more people will be inclined to not only offer and make recommendations, but when you come to them and you say to them that we want more delegation, so when you approach them, they don't feel that you are picking on them. They feel that this is just part of the way that we do things. So for example, I know this is not really in line with what we're talking about from a work perspective, but in my house, now that we're all home and I have some older children, definitely capable of doing some things around the house. So we've scaled back on some of the normal domestic help that we get, and we are relying more on ourselves to do a lot of these things. And we've created a culture where everybody knows that it's time to step up. So even if normally you're not asked to fill in the blank, make your bed or do the dishes or whatever it might be, now we want everybody to step up, especially in my house with Passover coming. So everybody has their own justifications and reasons, but if it's part of the culture, if everybody knows that now we're all contributing to taking out the trash and picking up after ourselves, et cetera, it's not about picking on anyone as much as you living up to the culture and the standards and the values that we have created for our institution. So for example, in a school, you might say if one of the values you adopt for behavior is respect, so you want to see respect in different contexts and in different ways. And a student who's out of alignment, you're not just saying you are bad, so to speak, not that you'd ever say that, but you're saying you're not in alignment with our values. And that's true in a corporate space as well, small business, it doesn't matter. Core values, the things that you really stand for, are much easier to get buy-in and alignment around because they're bigger than the individual. They're about the team, they're about the culture, they're about the environment. So it's a much easier conversation to have and a much more motivating one as well. So I hope that was a helpful start in terms of framing why delegation matters and of course getting your people on board. Now, to your point about people not being as self-motivated, Tracy, you're always going to have a range of self-motivation. So I think that is an important piece, but what you can be doing is putting opportunities out there, or maybe even calling in an associate from time to time and saying, hey, we've got a bunch of different things here. I'm wondering if any of these interest you. But again, if a leader isn't thinking in that way, most times others will not approach them. So it's a two-way street here, and we have to work together. All right. So decide what to delegate. There are a number of different ways to go here. Here are just some general parameters to think about. Number one, if you can start small, that is great. If you could start flexible, that's great as well, right? If it doesn't have to be done in a very specific kind of way. For example, we talked about a newsletter communication earlier. There are a lot of different ways to make that happen. You know, it doesn't have to look the way that you've always done it. So giving that over to somebody else and giving them the freedom to own it in a way that makes them feel like they're making a unique contribution, that's great. That's ideal. You don't always have the luxury of doing that, but oftentimes you can. And again, wherever you can, leave ample time for mistakes, because we have to assume that there's a learning curve here. Mistakes are going to happen. And the less of a rush that you're in, the more that you could have calm and healthy conversation to improve upon the work that was already done. Okay, there are other things as well. We talked about them before, the big rocks, et cetera, different considerations for every situation. And I do have some other resources possibly to share a little bit later. But again, in that masterclass, that's where I go really deep on the topic of delegation and all of its components. Here is the situational leadership model that I referenced before. Now, you'll notice it moves from I'm talking about the top one now. It moves from the bottom right to the bottom left, but goes up first. So follow the white bell curve, if you will, from bottom right up to bottom left down. So S1 to S2 to S3 and to S4. Okay, so when we talk about low directive, I'm in S1 for the moment, low directive and low support, these are all, I believe, more on the personal side of things. So in other words, if you look at the bottom, I know I'm jumping around here, but please roll with me if you can. So the color codes are aligned. So the two reds are connected, the two oranges or golds, etc. And so S1 and D1 go hand in hand. So when your person, looking at the bottom now, is of low competence, that means that they're not so knowledgeable, they don't really understand what to do yet, but they're highly committed because they're just excited to do something new. They're in the directing stage. They need a lot of direction from the leader because they don't have that skill, if you will, that knowledge on their own. So you have to tell them, do this and then do this and then do this, sort of mapping it out for them very clearly. As you go through the model, you will notice it moves for coaching is still different than supporting. Coaching is still telling more. There's still direction there. Okay. And then when he gets to support, the direction starts to scale back. And I'm more on the supportive side of things. So it's really a question of where are your people at any particular time? What is their existing skill set? What efficacy do they have? How motivated are they? And that's what we talked about before, about everybody being in a different situation. You could ask two people to do the same thing, but they might be plotted in different places. And you as the leader, the more you know, or the more you can sense where they are and what is needed from you to help them cross the finish line, the better it's going to be. Okay, Sarah, I'm noticing your comment about allowing time for mistakes, right? That is very important, right? Finding out if you have the right people is also critical. Sometimes if we start small, we can make that determination, and then we can figure out if in fact we need to be scaling it back because we don't necessarily have the right person. But either way, so this is just something else for you to think about. The answer, Tracy, is I do have this, I believe, as a PDF. I certainly can direct you to more. You're welcome to email me after the presentation for this resource or for anything else. And by the way, a lot of people have been asking me for certificates. I do offer a do your own. So I will be happy to reply to an email with a copy of the certificate. All you need to do is fill in the session that you attended, your name, the date, and the certificate is yours. Unfortunately, I cannot send you an embossed gold medal or one of those kinds of things, but the rest of it is there and hopefully will help you if certification is necessary for your professional practice or your continued professional growth. Okay, here's another version of a model just to take a look at when you understand the situation. Recognize that there are, let's take a look at the left side for a moment, the three options where it says stable environment, high growth or changing environment, or environment in crisis. I would argue that we probably are in either an environment in crisis or at least high growth or changing environment right now because of all the effects of corona virus and the remote learning and everything we're dealing with. So here, according to this model, there's probably more of an authoritarian emphasis than there normally would be, depending on the nature of the subordinate that you're talking to. So now looking at the bottom, starting on the left side, the more inexperienced the person, the more authoritarian response is necessary. That's similar to the S1D1 we talked about before, where the individual is on the front end of their learning curve, so they need more of direction. But they call it authoritarian, we call it direction, same concept. Okay, as you move to capable and then expert, that's where participative is more appropriate. And eventually, as you look to the top right corner, that's where you finally get delegative, if that is a word, I guess it is, where delegation is really the appropriate response for the leader because the environment is stable, the person is an expert, they know what to do, they know the processes, there's no real concerns there, and as a result, you can delegate, which basically means give the job to that other person and give them the space to do it. Okay, Malachi, just send me an email when you're done if you need a certificate. I'll be more than happy to send it. Okay, Colleen, I appreciate your honesty here. We all need to work on how we respond to mistakes, and also, yes, you raised an important point. When people are doing successful things or doing the right thing, we want to reward them and acknowledge them as well. And that's something we will talk about further as we move our process forward. So again, if you got nothing else out of this presentation, and by the way, there's a lot more and some free goodies on the back end, so please do stay with me as long as you can. I will tell you that understanding that delegation is not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on the leader. It depends on the subordinate. It depends on the circumstance. All of those things factor in. And if you're not sure, reference charts, maybe talk to some associates that you work with to determine, is this the right job for this and this person? We'll talk in a minute about helping fill in any gaps that that person might have. But fundamentally, you want to be asking yourself, can this person do the job? Will this person do the job? Will the person do the job in the way that's intended and with the right attitude? All of these are valid questions to be asking yourself. Okay, let's continue. So now that we know the basics here, we have to build knowledge and efficacy, which basically means fill in the gaps. And you can do, by the way, a skills gap analysis. There are charts that will help you with that. And that basically says, what are the skills that are required? What are the gaps between the individual and those skills at present? And how do we fill those gaps? Okay, so what do they still need to learn? How will they learn it? And how will they practice it? Practice is critical, right? We need to not only learn things, but we need to put them in practice. I think most of you here would probably agree that what you got out of college was much less valuable in many ways than what you have learned since, because of your experiential implementation of your learning, right? You're putting it into practice, and when you do, you become more proficient. And that's really true for everything. So the higher the stakes, in particular, the more timely that these things need to get done, the more support you need to provide sooner. But that, again, is the question we want to be asking ourselves. What are the gaps? What do they need to know? And by the way, you don't necessarily have to have all the answers. You could be asking your intended associate to fill in these answers as well, right? What do you think you already do well? What do you think you would need help with? How can I provide that for you? It could be virtual courses. It could be one-to-one mentoring. It could be a lot of different things, grabbing some books and other, other resources. There's no one answer for everybody, and different learners prefer their information in different ways. All of that could vary here as well. Okay. Now, another component about making this move forward, and it's still we're still in section 1. Some of these segments will go faster. This is probably the longest in terms of time allocation. Be clear about task and outcome, right? What exactly has to happen, by when, and what does a good outcome look like? The clearer you are, the clearer and the better the project will be on the back end. It's kind of like creating a rubric for your students or any type of guidelines for your employees. The more information that is available with guidelines, ideally you want it in writing, not because in most cases you will have a fight, let's call it, but there could be confusion, there could be disagreement. Having it in writing will create an above board understanding for all parties. All right. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, find out what those are now. Ask questions like what's still unclear? What would a good outcome look like to you? What do I need to provide you with that you don't necessarily know? What could get in your way from making this happen or happen in the time frame that we're discussing? Right. Have them anticipate any possible challenges. And of course, Corona would not be your standard answer, but anything like that in terms of what is a reasonable challenge that may occur that could stand in the way of our success. And the more you discuss it up front, the better usually the outcome will be. Okay. And then the last, so that's segment number one. Let's now move into the second phase, which is empower, right? We want to empower our people to do the work. So this is pretty straightforward. Not always is it done, but if you have an organization and you have an individual who you are tasking or empowering to do something, let everybody know. You might say to them, I've asked Stacy to do the following, and I'm really pleased and really appreciative that she stepped up in such an important way. Please be responsive to Stacy. When she asks you questions, recognize that they're going to be helpful not only to her, but to you and to our entire organization. Okay, so coming from you as the leader is an important piece here, because that sort of puts everybody into their respective place to understand that that in so doing, they're helping the team. Okay. And if there's any resources that they need, access to certain files, access to certain individuals, certain funding, whatever it might be, all of these things are going to help our Stacy get the work done and do it properly. Okay. Yeah. The planning is difficult, Colleen, and I'm glad that you raised that. It's hard for everybody to properly plan. But think about it this way. You know, there's the adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I would say that an ounce of planning is worth a pound of non-planning, meaning to say, forgetting the fact that once you roll something out, if you haven't planned it properly, you're going to have to undo and redo, which is itself a major consideration and something we want to avoid in the most serious way we can. But separate from that, just imagine all of the different tasks that you're presently doing that maybe you should not be doing, and how much more free time would you have to do the right work if you planned this process from the outset and empowered people to do more. So there are a lot of considerations here, and we have to balance, like everything else, the difficulties together with the potential benefits. But if you think about the benefits consistently, it will motivate you. Okay, now learning to trust. I would assume if I asked everybody on this call, how many of you have a hard time trusting others, there would be a bunch of hands that get raised. Sorry, before we get into this, let me go back for just a moment. And that's human nature, right? We're not necessarily so trusting, especially like I said before, if our name is on it and it has to get done in a way that we think has a particular single way of doing things. But you can't empower your people if you don't believe in them. And you have to be willing to let go. Those are critical. So let's take a look at the trust model. I've mentioned this before. Some of you may have already seen this. There are, according again to Ken Blanchard and Associates, there are 4 primary segments of trust. Now, when it comes to delegation, I'm curious to know from you, which one do you think is the most important for you to feel like you can delegate to somebody else? Is it A, which is able, that they have the competence to do the work? Is it B, that they are believable and they act with integrity? Is it C, that they are connected and care about others? Or is it D, that they are dependable and reliable and will do things in a timely and responsive way? Thank you all for responding. Again, please respond, all panelists and attendees. I'm seeing mostly D's, but I do see some others as well. I would encourage you to review something like this with anybody that you are going to be delegating to, letting them know that these are all important, letting them know perhaps that you weigh certain things more so than others, or maybe that you chose them because, in this case, let's say they're really dependable and they've demonstrated that time and again. But being dependable without being able, for example, is not so useful. And a number of you have pointed that out in one form or another. It's interesting, and I point out this a lot because in a previous webinar where I was talking about building trust as a leader and leading in difficult times, we focused on B and C being so important since those tend to be more about human relationships and connection, whereas A and D are more about getting the work done. Now, even if you're able and dependable, but forgive the language, if you're a jerk, nobody wants to talk to you, then you're still going to have a hard time getting the work done, unless, of course, no collaboration is required. But it's definitely helpful for people who are working with others to be connected and, of course, to be believable as well. If they're asking for information, that they know that the person who is collecting it can be trusted to use it properly and keep confidences and not think that they know everything. So all of these are important, and your answers have reflected that, but think about what's most important to you, both from a, let's call it morals standpoint or value standpoint, as well as what's most important to you specific to what you're asking somebody to do for you, and let them know that. Again, the clearer you are in everything you communicate, what's important, what needs to get done, how it needs to get done, by when, what space you'll provide, what authority you'll provide, encouragement, et cetera, et cetera. The more you can share up front, the more confident and comfortable people will be in working with you and getting this done. The worst thing you could have is burning your bridges because you're tasking things. People have a bad experience. And then, as they say on Amazon, the reviews are out. And once they're out, if you get a bunch of 1 stars in there, nobody is going to want to work with you in the future. So please make sure that you're getting lots of 5 stars up front because you're doing this carefully and with a good system that works for you. Okay, be prepared to assist is another piece here. So even though I've empowered somebody else, I still need to be able to step in on occasion. You have to think about this carefully and be sure that the person really needs it, but you may want to ask them, how is it going? Can I help you? This kind of thing. And the main thing is you are offering it. You are being prepared. You are preparing yourself and you're expressing that preparation to others so that so they feel supported. Now, we will talk in a minute about where you have to step in. It's a little bit different. Right now, we're simply talking about in your mind, don't think that I'm abdicating by handing it or punting it to you and letting you just do everything on your own. All right. The last piece here is the component of, looks like our language got cut away here, but we want to be able to monitor. That's what that should have said. Okay, monitoring progress. So we want to stay on top of it, right? Things that get inspected get done, right? So we motivates colleagues. We often think that we are demotivating. Nobody wants us around, but no, a proper and healthy check-in is the way to go. And you want to schedule this. You want to be making regular times to talk and do that at the beginning, because the more people know that this is just how the process unfolds, the less they will think that you are responding to a concern. But either way, you do need to be checking in often to make sure that, number one, you're catching problems, number two, you're motivating others, and number three, you have a sense of how things are progressing. Okay. Um, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Deka. I would say it's a fine line. You may want to even ask that question to your direct report or to the delegatee and say, what would proper support look like that wouldn't feel like I'm coming to micromanage you? Otherwise, if they don't have an answer or you choose not to ask that question, I would say it's more of a check-in. But again, the more that you're coming from the outset and saying, I'd like to meet weekly, for example, every Wednesday at 8 a.m. to review your progress and next steps, that's an indication from the beginning that you care, you're taking it seriously, and it's not a reflection about anyone's work because, or any individual's work, because you would say that to anybody. Now, this is a challenging one. I'll mention it quickly. Hopefully it won't be necessary, but on occasion it will be necessary for you to make corrections and possibly even to redirect, which may even include taking back or reassigning. So if your guidelines, which should be in writing and are clear and are something you've been talking about, cannot be followed for whatever the reason, have a face-to-face conversation, explain what's going to happen if things don't get fixed, personal implications, organizational implications. Try to agree on a plan to fix it, but if that doesn't work, then you may need to take it back or to reassign. Okay, forgive me for going quickly here. I do want to be good with everybody's time. I think we will be close to 1 o'clock when we finish, but we may go over, 3 o'clock when we finish Eastern time, but that may be a few minutes over for you. And of course, you'll decide if you can stick around, but definitely there are some goodies I will be sharing with you soon, some free resources from my website. Okay, the last part is to recognize and reward. Pretty straightforward, I would think. So recognizing key milestones, celebrating success. It doesn't have to be just at the end, but milestones along the way also deserve celebration, whether it's some kind of treat or a mention in the memo or whatever you think works for you. Letting people know that you're noticing and that you're appreciative along the way matters and motivates. Share in rewards and give credit. So recognize those who are helping. If you've received accolades, make sure that you share them and pass them on to the people who really deserve them, especially if we're talking about a team. And finally, review and learn. So you want to be making sure that either personally or with the different people that were part of this process, what went well and what didn't, what most contributed to the outcome that we got, and what can we be doing differently moving forward to make sure that that process is even better than this one. Remember, you're not going to have perfection ever, but typically speaking, if you do it the right way, you will grow. And growth is a goal in and of itself. Typically speaking, the first time you do anything, it will not be nearly as good as what will happen later. Okay, yes, another thing, Colleen, that I'm adding a lot to all of your plates over here, but I hope that these are valuable tips that will position you for long-term success. And again, think big picture. The more that you can start to delegate and do so in a way that is healthy and comfortable and successful, the more you can do the work that's really most valuable for you and get out of the office at a decent hour, which so many of us struggle to do. Okay, so in a perfect world with more time, I would ask you to actually do this here, but I would like for you to, at least in your mind, think about what is a task that you can be, and maybe you could just add this quickly to the chat. What is a task that you would like to be delegating? I've mentioned some ideas in my examples. Obviously, you know your situations best. Something maybe you were thinking about that drove you to be part of this call in the first place. What is something in your work environment that if you could delegate would help another person, would help you get more work done or the right work, whatever that might look like? Okay, payroll. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, an assessment calendar. All right, so some of these are maybe more organizational or fiscal. Some of them may be more related to operational, managing issues with teachers learning, delegating to visit Zoom classroom meetings. Okay, good. Calendar tracking, facility rentals, and many others as well. Keep those coming as I continue to slide through our deck. We are almost done, but I want to be able to continue to see what things you are thinking about delegating. They could be really small. Again, if you start small, that could be the safe way to go. The more specific you could be, the better. So a quick question for you before we move into our last slides. Did we meet our objectives? I didn't put these numbers into the first part, but is it reasonable to say that we could list at least 3 benefits as well as 3 challenges to with delegation? Let's start with that. Can we say yes to number 1? And not only can you reply yes, but you're also welcome to chime in with what are some benefits as well as some challenges. So let's kind of make that a rolling response. Thank you, everybody. I see your yeses, which is great. Once again, all panelists and attendees, for everybody who's not set there already, go into your chat and make that minor adjustment. Include, please, the benefits and the challenges, share the work and the wealth, grow people, challenge and trust, eliminate bottlenecks. Excellent. Keep those coming. Now, could you explain the 13 steps of effective delegation and their importance? I hope the answer is yes. That's probably a harder ask from me, but I hope that the answer is still yes. Many of them you already were doing, so it's not that overwhelming. We introduced probably a few new ideas here, but fundamentally, I think they were logical. In other words, these are steps that do make sense for us to be considering and trying to accomplish. And if we follow them, they will guide us and they will benefit us. You are going to, by the way, to get a recording of the webinar emailed to you, so you can go back, look at the list again, and just double check and feel comfortable, hopefully, with all of these. Okay, these are great, great responses. I just wish I could read all of them. Let me see over here. One thing I wanted to share with you are a bunch of links. Okay, so I'm going to get to that in just a second. Those free goodies that I promised you are forthcoming in just a moment. So let's take a look now at our next slide over here. First of all, you should know that this week I've got some other webinars that are planned. You can go to my website, impactfulcoaching.com. On the top of the navigation, you'll see it right there, upcoming webinars, or you can click /upcoming webinars. I've got one tomorrow on active learning techniques to engage in online learners, which I hope I was able to do today, at least to some degree. And then I have a shared webinar on Thursday morning, Eastern, leading in the new normal, as well as an afternoon, for me at least, secrets to leading effective sustained change, because change management is important, especially today in day and age. I have a feeling we have a lot of change coming down the pike. Now, how you can support me and the work that I do, because the goal here is really to make sure that our professionals continue to get free resources, especially in a time and day and age like this. I'm going to just include it in the chat, so feel free to click that if you'd like to make a small contribution that helps me keep these services available to anyone who wants them. I also would love to be able to visit with you one day in person if I can, because frankly, like I said, I've said many times, I enjoy this much more in person than I do over webinars, though these are starting to feel pretty comfortable too, but would love to be able to visit with you. And if there's any way that I could be helpful in person, here's a link to reach out to me to have that conversation. Now, I am going to also grab some links to some free goodies. I promised those to you, and they are now here. I just uploaded this new ebook. It's like a white paper of sorts. A lot of important information here on getting a handle on workplace stress. I actually talked about stress in a recent webinar, so hopefully you'll get that recording as well. But here is a link to the ebook. So you could download this, grab a copy, and go through it when you have some time. And then the last thing I want to share with you, I'm just grabbing the links first if I can. I kind of pre-organized them elsewhere so that I would be able to do this efficiently. The last ones I wanted to share with you are some productivity tools. I've got a blueprint on productivity that I recently released, as well as a free productivity assessment. And I just shared those links in the chat as well. So I would encourage you all to grab anything and everything that you think could serve you. Just click on the links now. Hopefully they will open up in a different window. You could look at them later, and if in fact they will be valuable to you, by all means go ahead and download them or take them, because again, this is a great opportunity to be learning, a great opportunity to understand where we have ways by which we can be growing. And of course, I really would love it if we could all share what we're learning in places where our colleagues who are not participating will understand the value of continued learning. Maybe they will join us in a future webinar. And of course, you're welcome to share the recording links with your colleagues. So I'm hopeful that all of this has been useful to you. Again, be in touch if you need a certificate. Be in touch in general. I love your responses and your questions and your feedback. This is not something that I was planning to make my March or now almost April into, but that's what it's become. That's our new normal. And if this is a way by which I could be adding value, it is my honor to do so. So once again, look out for the upcoming webinars, register for whatever you think would be useful. Even if you cannot attend, if you register, you will get the recording. And I'm hopeful that you will join me for as many as you wish. And of course, share the word with your colleagues. Thank you also very much for being here. I know I shared a lot in a short period of time, and I appreciate the need to review. So I'm glad you'll be able to access the recording. And like I said, please do share. So with that, I'm going to end our meeting and wish you all a wonderful day. Stay safe. Let's continue to pray for one another. Let's continue to support one another, and let's continue to learn and to grow, because that's what's going to make us feel like we're really optimizing the difficulty that we are presently experiencing. Have a blessed and safe day, everyone.